you want to chat with each other, via the chat, typing, that's fine. And we'll have some spillover time possibly in other matters where we could catch up more informally. But first of all, I just want to say that I'm thankful that you've all made the time on such a nice day to join this project meeting. Really thankful for that. On today's agenda, I want to give some time for to provide some background for folks that missed the first meeting that we had a couple months ago. I'll provide some updates on some of the work tasks that fell in SWRPC's court, and we'll start a discussion about goals and objectives. And I'll talk about kind of the next steps and how we'll continue to get feedback on those. This is a version of kind of the general scope of the project. If you noticed probably on the home screen that this project is dedicated to the Cheshire Rail Trail, what we're calling the south portion, roughly between the intersection with the Ashuelot Trail in Keene south to the Mass state line and a little bit beyond maybe. This is the general calendar for some of the work tasks. And here we are at the second of 3 project meetings that we're using to help collect feedback, promote input opportunities, things like that. You can see there's some text items in there, update, memo. Those are times where we would be posting something to the project webpage, emailing them out to the email list. In the case of the literature review, we already have. The other items labeled memo are under internal review, and we'll hopefully be sharing those with folks next week. The items in red are kind of a change from the first time you looked at this. Had some technical difficulties getting the count data together, but so that kind of moved from earlier in the winter. And again, hopefully that will get through internal review here next week. So this is the gist of the timeline. As far as what some of those line items are, there's the working group meetings. I'm reaching out to a pretty broad group for folks to join, and generally prioritizing the schedules of the 5 host municipalities. There are members after all, but there's of course this much bigger umbrella of people interested in the trail that is being invited to all the meetings, which are available for anyone to attend. And I encourage you to share the announcements with your networks as you see fit. As far as other tasks, what we say is an existing conditions assessment. There are kind of 3 things. The literature review has been talked about at the last meeting and on the project page, and the first 2 items there will be coming up next week. Record of our counting activities over the summer and fall. We talked about online survey, about a 5-minute survey that many of you helped to successfully promote within your networks. That's closed earlier in the month. Share some results from that, as well as some of the interviews and conversations we've had so far. And hopefully you've been to the project webpage. It's been very, very popular among all our agency pages. And we'll keep that updated on a weekly basis. What we talk about is the needs analysis. It comes down to developing two things for this group to look at and provide feedback on: a vision, goals, and objectives, which we'll look at later, and what we're calling an implementation plan. This is a list of more specific projects and their locations along the trail that will move those objectives along. And finally, the ETA on a roughly 10-year kind of horizon document with polished, goals, objectives, and a list of projects will be created in the April, May timeframe. Cool. So that's a very quick recap of what we talked about last time. You're welcome to go to the project page and look at the meeting summary for a little more detail, as well as the slides and recording. One item we did have to cut a little bit short last time that I wanted to make maybe 5 or 10 minutes for was for folks to provide input on what they felt were their top goals for the trail that they'd like to see achieved and make over the next 10 years. We if you remember from the first meeting, we ran up against time, and I think there were some people who didn't get to share this. So I'd like to just turn it over to anyone now to unmute yourself if you'd like to briefly, 1 minute or 2 minutes, share some of your top goals. Feel free to do that.
Henry, I got one goal, and that's to have the Prowse Bridge over 101 put up that in Keene, that is a historical bridge from DOT. A DOT, New Hampshire DOT engineered that bridge, and so it's got a lot of it dates back to one of the first bridge designs on the interstate system, if not the first design, but it's one of the first anyhow. So we want to see that in the extension of the Eastern Ave Trail, Cheshire Rail Trail to the bridge. That's one of our top priorities. And
Chuck, I don't think you made the first meeting. When you say our top priorities, are you speaking for the city of Keene or
Pathways for Keene? Pathways for Keene, and also the Keene Bicycle Pedestrian Committee in Keene has that as a top priority as well.
Thanks, Chuck. Would anyone else like to share a top goal for the trail that didn't get a chance last time?
I'll chime in a little bit. I'll second what Chuck said as a member of BPAC as well. We've also high priorities is continuity of that whole trail. The gaps that Chuck outlined, safe crossings of 101 and of Swanzey Factory Road, and another is good wayfinding branding along the entire, consistent wayfinding and branding along the entire trail, and amenities and services at key points, parking areas, so kiosks, maps, things like that. Ideally, bike repair stations at key points, and at least directions towards water and bathrooms, if not water and bathrooms.
Thanks for the feedback, Roland. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more.
Henry, this is Paul Codle at Fitzwilliam. We've got a couple of areas that need significant upgrading because they're in very rough shape, and they're okay in the winter, but in the summer they're very wet and largely unpassable. One is a section between Royalston Road and Highway 119. And the other is the very southern piece that extends from Highway 12 down to the Mass border. Parts of it are in pretty good shape, but there are segments of it that are very, very wet. And I think the other 2 priorities would be safe crossings for Highway 119 and Highway 12.
Thanks for sharing. I think to both of the last comments, you'll see how there's a lot of agreement in the survey with some of the things you mentioned.
Henry, this is Mike, if I could speak quickly.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Kowalczyk. I live in the town of Swanzey. A couple things I have is, one, I'd like to ensure that the Cheshire Trail connecting to the North Central Pathway in Winchton is also taken into consideration, because then that connects Southwest New Hampshire with the Massachusetts system. In addition to that, there's another trail there in Winchton called the Ware River Trail that will actually connect with the Mass Central Rail Trail, which there's a big group, I think Craig's involved with this, maybe working on that with plans to run from Boston to Northampton. So if we can make those connections, that's pretty huge, I believe, for our region. So that's one, and I'll just mention one other. I know I'm pretty sure it's in Fitzwilliam. There's a couple places where over the years, roads were worked on and they actually blocked the trail, meaning bridges weren't put in, but they just filled in the rail trail. And now you have to have this bypass around it. So if that could at least be put on the list to put the bridge back in, because usually it goes through cuts, which are beautiful parts of the trail. And now there's a few sections where you can't even use that section of the trail because the road blocks the trail. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So I'd like to leave it at that for extra top goals, so we can move on with some of the other content. If you'd like to share your top goals further, put them in the chat, send me an email. Those will be helpful as we develop the goals and objectives. And there'll be other opportunities that I'll explain on how to share additional input. So the first updates, on the agenda that I want to share about involve the online survey. This was a 5-minute survey. Again, it concluded earlier this month. I think the first time I introduced this, we had maybe 100, 200 responses. And after your help to promote the survey, we eventually got over 700 responses, which I would call a success. I'll share some sound bites from the survey, and again, we'll be following up with a written report to the group later. So as to around 700 folks responding, who were they? Well, most of them had used the trail at least in the last year. So they should have a pretty good sense of how it's working today. A minority of folks hadn't been on the trail at all, but their input can still be of interest to this project. We asked about how close the trail was to people's home and their work. And I think the general conclusion is most people lived within walking or biking distance to the trail. I think one thing that shows is the potential for more active, transportation. And even looking at how close this section of trail was to work addresses, a slight majority of people were in walking or biking distance to their work. So kind of on both fronts, a lot of people live and work near the trail. How people use the trail, and again, we asked how do people use it over the last year. The most common response of the preset choices was recreation. Pretty general category. The top two were recreation and exercising, not so much for commuting, school, errands. People could pick multiple choices here. So there may have been some errors with people only picking one choice and moving on. I'm not sure, but this is what we found. In the other category, a lot of responses there, mostly from people saying they were snowmobiling, which I, when I was laying this out, considered that under recreation, but that's the majority of the other responses. So there's a sense of how people are using the trail now, recreation and exercising. As to what people were using on the trail, the most common thing was just walking. followed by bicycling. And in third, very significant number of people snowmobiling. So that's, it's positive to see there's a lot of participation there. We asked in the survey about top concerns, and, or excuse me, this isn't top concerns, this is safety related concerns. And of these kind of preset responses, actually most people said they didn't have any safety concerns. So that's a positive. But of the people who had safety concerns, they were related to things like the trail condition, too bumpy, things like that, as well as traffic, at the trail and road crossings. Thanks for Mary for leaving some info in the chat, and encourage people to keep doing that. We'll look at that later. Moving on some of the survey highlights, we asked some kind of demographic questions. We wanted to see, how well our sample compared to the overall population. And, the biggest age group we reached was age 55 to 64. Let's see, about half of respondents were age 45 to 64. To give us some sense of comparison, I grabbed the numbers from Cheshire County and kind of put them alongside here so you can get a sense of which populations were more represented. Overall, we had more representation from some of the older age groups, 45 to 64, and less from youth, especially those under 15. Something to keep in mind, when you're digesting this, and when you see the more detailed report later. Not even representation, male, female. More men responded than women. Something to keep in mind. And maybe one of the most key questions as to thinking about improvements for the trail, what people want to see. The top one by far, folks could choose, I believe, 3 from this list, was improving the trail surface. About 40% of people talked about improving the trail surface, and then kind of second and third were focused on trailheads and maps and signage. So those were some of the popular kind of preset categories. There were a lot of other responses that we're still going through. I've just placed kind of a random sample of some of the responses on the right side. Things like, connecting the trail to our other rail trails, which, isn't physically connected right now. People were interested to use ATVs on the trail. There's some interesting suggestions like signs focusing on who maintains a section of trail, giving them some notoriety for their work. Lots of people were happy with the trail the way it is. Anyway, we'll have a more comprehensive list of those to share later, but that's just a little flavor of some of the responses. I think this is the last survey soundbite I wanted to share. Many people, actually, I think most respondents, expressed an interest in helping out with the trail in some way. And folks, left us their contact information and are, I think available in the future to do things like, clean up the trail, mow, help promote the trail. There really was, I was surprised at how much interest there was. And, we have that information on file. I think a lot of the people who responded maybe are doing some of these things already too, but we didn't ask about that. So that's the quick kind of some of the highlights or flavor what we learned from the online survey. Thank you again to everyone who helped to promote that. As far as some of the other outreach activities, we also conducted and are still continuing some interviews either by phone or Zoom or email to get into more detail about organization and community interest in the trail. The bullets in front of you are those that we've completed so far, and we're in the process of scheduling and a couple of more. To give you a sense of some of the questions and responses that were in these stakeholder surveys, I'll just offer a couple of excerpts. So what you're seeing are a couple of the questions that were posed to the Department of Transportation's Bureau of Rail and Transit. And they explained some of the basics that relate to the trail. The first one is about how they make the determination if motorized vehicles are available. The second one, again, from a longer interview, is a key one that I think we all need to keep in mind, that the state-owned corridors are being held by the state with the potential for railroad use in the future. It's unclear the likelihood or the timing of that, but the uses that we're enjoying now and talking about are considered kind of a, not intermediate, but potentially a temporary use. Let's see, we had a couple of findings from an interview with our sister planning organization in Massachusetts. And I think, one thing that was shared is something we heard about today, connecting the trail kind of back to Winchendon and Massachusetts' larger network. And also learned a little bit more about how Massachusetts is improving rail trails. One point was made that they have favored paved facilities, which is a cost consideration. And some sound bites from conversation that my colleague Todd Horner had with Town of Fitzwilliam staff and officials. One thing pointing out was, and to keep in mind, is that what we think of as one trail is sometimes overlaid with other trails. The Monadnock Metacomet, the Wantasticate, it's an important part of that network or network connection to those other longer trails. Cool, going pretty well on time. So those are some of the updates on some of the public outreach activities. I mentioned that still finalizing some of the count data with the intent of starting to share that next week, along with kind of memos on the interviews and survey information. So look for those. And I think I'm ready to move on to the draft goals and objectives discussion. Does anyone have any questions on the last section? Have time for one or two. Yeah, Craig, go ahead.
Let me take myself off mute here. I made some notes here to raise some questions. Paving in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, back in the late 90s, was the only state in 50 that required paving of rail trails. It took me several years to have that erased, but it has been erased. If you Google the phrase Chapter 11, Mass DOT Design Guidebook, you will see that there is ample opportunity for every community that wants to build a trail to use stone dust, just like all other states. It is not true that there is a requirement for paving. In the 20th century, that was the case. But there were 8 rail trail wars came about because of the idea of requirement of paving. That is not the case anymore. And I just want to quickly mention, you mentioned the Mass Central Rail Trail. That is the longest rail trail in the Northeast United States. It is the most complicated, one of the most fraught with danger. I actually have a land acquisition company where I swoop in and block out sales to adjoining landowners. And I've owned 3.2 miles at one time, and the bridge that's behind me was my bridge, along with 2 or 3 others that I saved from being demoed. This is the last of its type still standing in southern New England. This connects directly with, in Northampton, where I'm speaking to you from right now. This trail connects directly with the longest interstate trail in the Northeast. In fact, if you were to zoom up into altitude a little bit and look at where I'm sitting right now with a 150-mile radius around it, taking in everything in mid-state New Hampshire and Vermont, and in everything in eastern New York and southern New England. This is the densest network of dead steam railroad corridors in North America. And what we are building out here is simply astounding. There's nothing else like it in North America. They don't go to obscure coal mine branch lines. They go to completely intact, beautiful small towns, and it interconnects everything. And so my main goal would be to have a 3-state discussion here instead of insulating, the regional planning agency in New Hampshire without any kind of, let's zoom this up in altitude here. New Hampshire DOT still hasn't hired, as far as I know. I don't think they've hired a replacement for Larry Kennison. And that needs to happen. I don't believe there's any other state in the union that has no bike ped coordinator in the state. That needs to be part of the discussion. So that's it for me. I'll continue to love what you're talking about. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. And for folks who aren't aware of Craig's work related to rail trails, Craig, if you could leave a link to your website or contact information in the chat, I think many attendees would be interested in your newsletter.
Sure.
And just to address kind of where this project kind of fits in to rail trails, more big picture, the SWRPC sees this project as kind of a parallel complementary effort to state planning. Actually, there's state trails planning going on right now that will continue to, share opportunities with the group on. I'll fit a link in the chat in a minute to tune you into that project. So yeah, I think we want planning and coordination to be happening at all levels, and this is just one of the forums for it. So I wanted to kick off next a discussion about vision, goals, and objectives. And one of our key goals for the project is to develop a unified vision for how the trail is improved going forward. And this would be supported by statements, goals that express the priorities that, some of which you've mentioned today, and how to get there, the objectives. So the objectives being kind of the more actionable, measurable tasks. So to kick off a discussion, staff have developed a draft vision, goals, and objectives, and I'm going to kind of skim over those, and we'll stop kind of after each goal for questions and feedback. You'll have other opportunities to look at these and provide feedback. I've also, for your information, sent a copy of the goals and objectives as a PDF in the chat. So depending on how you're attending, you could feel free to open that and skim over those ahead of where we are on screen. So we took a try at a draft vision statement. Some of the ingredients we used here were considering that we're trying to think not over the next 40 or 30 years, but maybe the vision that could be achieved in the next 10 years. And that we wanted to address as many of the comments from the first meeting and the online survey as we could. So I'll just read it aloud and let that kind of sink in, and then we'll just stop for feedback. The Cheshire Rail Trail will function as a continuous transportation and recreation corridor that is scenic, accessible, safe, and welcoming to a wide variety of users, local residents and visitors alike. Trail facilities will balance the needs and priorities of the trail's many stakeholders, including state agencies, municipalities, landowners, user groups, businesses, and nonprofit organizations who will work collaboratively to maintain and develop the trail as a shared public asset. The trail will be widely celebrated as a valuable resource that enhances the surrounding area's quality of life, ecology, and economic vitality. So there you have it. This is, I guess my question is, what do you think?
This is Mike. I have one comment.
Thanks, Mike.
I think if we could put something in there related to what Craig said regarding connecting to the bigger network, some sort of a statement that we're not isolating ourselves to just this trail and even our region, because like Craig said, there's so much going on in our region. And I just thinking at least making that our vision is to connect, I think would be a great add. So that's my comment.
Great. I can't come up with something on the fly, but we'll give that some thought. Great. Well, this is our first shot at kind of a big picture vision. Feel free to leave other ideas that come to mind in the chat. We'll provide some instructions later too on how you can look at this and provide more feedback. And yeah, thanks, Rick. Feel free to use the thumbs up or thumbs down as we go through these in the Zoom reactions kind of choices there. Okay, so as far as draft goals, first off, I'll say we had a jump start on coming up with some goals and objective language from other planning projects we've done. We've modified these for this project, but for folks who participated in our project dedicated to the Ashuelot Rail Trail, some of these will look very similar, and some of them are in fact almost verbatim what were in that previous project's plan. And you can skim over these, but the kind of the big picture goals focus on awareness about the trail, use as an alternative to driving, outdoor experiences. So that's the recreational aspects, health, opportunities to fitness. Economic development would fit under goal 4. Making the trail accessible, safe, and welcoming. That's a lot of objectives under there. And the last goal is about kind of people coming together to maintain and contribute to improving the trail. Thanks for folks continuing on topic in the chat. So what I'll do is, well, let me go back. and just stop here for a moment. What we want to kind of start to have some conversation on is whether anything is missing or we need to clarify some of the language that we're offering. So want to leave time, and feel free to interrupt me to find out if, you know, where you're coming from, you're not seeing your work or vision realized in one of these areas. Does anyone have any comments on these goals?
As Craig and Michael and others have emphasized, I think there needs to be a goal about meta connectivity with other trail systems.
Yeah, thanks, Roland. I think.
Tom Dustin here.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, you know, whenever you have this kind of discussion, there's always the elephant in the room, which is the use of the trail by ATVs. And so I don't know, when we say accessible, safe, and welcoming for all ages, abilities, and user groups, you know, that's complicated. When you have groups that are, whose use is inconsistent with other groups. So we gotta, I don't know what to do about this. But we ought at least, you know, have that in the discussion.
Yeah. Let me address that a little bit. When these were originally written, they're written with the idea of existing like permitted uses relative to the trail. So something like ATV use wouldn't fall under this umbrella. You'd see it when we get to the objective level. So that's kind of the big picture context. I noticed Shelley Winters raising her hand. Feel free to interrupt, Shelley, if you'd like to add a comment there.
I was just gonna say, this is, Shelley Winters from the Department of Transportation. This corridor, the Cheshire Branch Railroad corridor, was acquired with Federal Highway Administration transportation enhancement funds. So it does have a motorized use restriction, which would prohibit ATVs at this point. So it's a very cumbersome process to get those to be an allowed use. So I would say at this point, I wouldn't consider them. It's not a current use. I wouldn't consider it a future use unless the municipalities were going to go through a very difficult process with Federal Highway, which no town, no entity anywhere in the nation has yet to successfully, as far as I know, achieve status change. So,
Tom, again, just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. I think one of the most important things there was this is a process that involves municipalities. So, you know, although I mentioned there's people interested in ATV use, this is really something for municipalities to bring forward into the dialogue. I don't think we've heard it yet in any of our municipal discussions. Any other initial comments on the kind of the goals?
This is Mike again. I don't know if this is a goal or an objective, but I think we should at least have somewhere discussions about maintenance strategies because as we know, it takes a lot of money, time, and effort to get these to the level of quality and standard we're looking for. And then the maintenance is really important to make sure we preserve it and Mother Nature doesn't take over again after, 10 years or something. So
Yeah.
somewhere in the document, I don't know if it's a goal or an objective, we should be talking at least strategies on how maintenance could be done.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Henry, on this is Paul Kotola. On the same note, relating to maintenance, I think there needs to be something in there about funding. Maintenance doesn't happen by itself, and it underlies a lot of the capability of not only establishing the trail, but also maintaining it over time. and it's not something you can ignore.
Mhm. Yeah, hearing you loud and clear, Paul, and Mike, on the maintenance aspect. Let's pay attention to how that shows up. I believe under goal number 2 and 5. I think you'll see that these are pretty high level, the objectives, but I think there's some opportunities to suggest some good ideas for maintenance. So this is a little small. I'll hopefully folks can see it. If not, please go to the chat and open up the PDF. The first goal, draft goal, dealt with awareness about the trail with residents, but also visitors. And there are 7 objectives. My Zoom controls out of the way. 7 objectives that address things like promotional materials and maps. Those were very big maps, were one of the big requests in the survey. Talking about things like a wayfinding system, with signage, where people are relative to the trail, how far to a downtown or an amenity. And on the promotion side, there's opportunities to partner with the state, but also private partners like Google Maps to provide more information and map data about the trail. So again, looking for any initial reactions, things that need clarification, things that are missing that would bring more awareness to the trail among residents and visitors.
I just wanted to point out that this is Chuck. I just wanted to point out that the Granite State Ambassadors, which are recognized by the state's travel and tourism, is having an event every year at the Big E, where they have a booth, a large booth under the pavilion of this activity, expo. Fair, expo, whatever, it's huge. And over 200,000 people come through that every season, every early fall season. And they're asking for rail trail rack cards to promote New Hampshire's rail trails. So I think it would behoove Southwest stakeholders to design that rack card and come up with something to have at the Big E. Because it would really promote tourism. It would really put the rubber to the road as far as these words go and demonstrate. We'll see what the results are as far as tourism, economic development. The other thing is, I had a question. Is the state coming up with a standard for trail signs? I heard they were, but I'm not sure what the source was on that.
It's a good question, Chuck. I don't know. If Shelley's still here, she might be able to answer it. I believe that's included in the state's trail plan update scope, is to at least bring that up.
Yeah, we'll look at that, but this corridor is one of the corridors that is managed under a cooperative agreement by the Department of Natural Cultural Resources Bureau of Trails. So I think you guys over in your part of the state may have seen some different signage that was probably born out of that state agency. So I can't speak to what they're doing currently.
Let me
Thank
talk
you, Shelley.
about the experience in what happened in New York a few years ago, where there was a report that came out with a very well-designed infographic that led you to read the report, that showed that one trail in New York was so astoundingly busy that it commanded that, or I should say, that it astounded Governor Cuomo so much that he commanded DOT in New York to build another 400 miles in 4 years. And the project was complete under budget and under time by the end of this past December. This was so astounding a few years ago that that's when I launched this newsletter that now goes out to over 10,000 people. The news of this so astounded Charlie Baker here in Massachusetts that he commanded all mid-level people in the 4 state agencies that had a role in developing trails in Massachusetts to meet in his offices, his suite of offices within the State House every 2 weeks under the new flag of something called Trails Team. And they took down the silos, and they're ramping up funding to get this network built. Every quarter, we see more and more funding coming out to build trails because of what happened in New York. And I don't think you guys have seen this yet. I'll make sure you get the infographic here, Henry. This is astounding what has happened. This is the lead, what you've all been looking for. This is the rationale for the reason to build these trails. I'll get that to you.
I'm happy to share that on. Thank you. And thank you for the feedback relative to this first objective. I think to Chuck's point, there's an opportunity to kind of wordsmith the 7th objective to mention some other, notable, more recent marketing opportunities. And yeah, we should address signage more specifically to, if it's focusing on the Bureau of Trails, that should be clarified in here. Let's keep on going because there are a couple of these, and want to keep folks' interest. The second goal that we've put together talks about using the corridor more as an alternative to driving, and just 2 objectives here, focusing on integrating the trail better with roads. Maybe it's connecting it with new sidewalks. I think there's a wayfinding aspect to that as well. And the other big one that seemed to come out is the trail surface itself. Folks are less willing to commute where the terrain's rougher. It's less efficient. It's less comfortable. So, if you're coming from an organization or someone who's interested in using the trails more to get to things like work or shopping or school, think about what objectives could assist the trail.
So Henry, this is Mike. I have a comment around this. And my thinking is, could this group do some work in communicating with businesses that have people that are within that commute? And from what I understand, it's about 5 miles, to encourage those businesses to provide at their facilities locker rooms and showers and things like that. Because personally, I used to bike to work every day on the Cheshire Trail from West Keene. I worked at Markham and Markham was great, and they provided that facility. But people worked at other companies like, Mike, that's great, but I get to work, I'm sweating like crazy. There's no place to take a shower, no place to put my stuff. So I think a piece to really making commuting to work is the businesses on that end are providing the facility to allow people to make it more convenient for them to use bikes and other means of transportation to get to and from work. Thank you.
I'll build on what Mike just said. This is Roland. To consider trailside amenities related to work environments like bike garages, more bike racks, things that are specifically focused on things that commuters might need, bike commuters.
Well, this is Tom here. I might also mention that to get people to sort of use several means to get to work. I mean, people might like to drive someplace, park their car, and then walk to work a couple of miles. I think if we're thinking about putting signs on main roads that lead to the trail, I think we should coordinate that with parking at the trail. I know this is a kind of a pain to think about parking, but you know, to get people driving a ways and then walking to work or walking to town or something like that, getting parking and signs from main roads coordinated with the trail.
Great points. And Tom, we're here to bring up the painful discussions and try to work through them and come to some consensus. Any others have suggestions here? Cool. I think some of these will show up in the item that focuses on making the trail more accessible too. The third draft goal we came up with focuses on what we're kind of calling outdoor experiences. We're thinking of things like walking in natural areas or using hiking trails. This is one where we thought it might be appropriate to talk about connectivity to other specific trails, not just the one in Mass, but our other state trails that are nearby to the east and west. Mention accessing things like public water bodies. There are a couple ponds along the corridor that are great for fishing or boating. And you remember from the vision that we talk about ecology too. And the trail is almost like a long piece of conservation land and habitat. So that's what we have here. I guess anything in need of clarification or initial ideas, objectives related to exercise, other outdoor experiences that we missed so far?
Henry, it's Paul again. As I look through this list, one of the things, the list both of the goals and objectives, one of the things that I noticed right away is it's a long list. And what I don't see is any sense of priority. And I think in terms of actual implementation, the priority thing is important because it focuses initiatives. The complexity I see is that the priorities may be different depending on where you are on the trail. Priorities for Keene may be very different than priorities for Fitzwilliam. And I don't know exactly how to address that, but I think it would be helpful if there were some sense of sort of what comes first in all of this, because I think it's pretty obvious you can't do it all, but there's no guidance about what the focus should be as we go forward. So that's just a broad comment. It's not specifically about goal 3. It's about the whole package.
It's a great comment, Paul, and you're exactly right. We're all coming into this from different communities or organizations that where some of these things are more of a priority or more in line with what we can do than others. The purpose of this project is to encapsulate everything, to create something that appeals to all of the trail groups. And I think one way the Planning Commission can help is by providing that context, in this final deliverable. And we can also help towards the end of the project to kind of kick off some discussion about where project participants see priorities to help to start those towards implementation. So the prioritization isn't going to be a big part of this. Right now, we're trying to think about everyone. Great, just skimming through the chat here. Bridget likely mentioning the Metacomet Monadnock. Yeah, that's missing here when we talk about connectivity to other trails. That's a notable one to name. Thank you for that. Let's keep moving on here. to the fourth goal is kind of a theme tied to our economies. I think there's, first of all, some tying here to what employers can do to encourage people to use and access the trail. But there's other things they can do as well, like, you know, when they're marketing, seeking seeking workers, we know that trails are a draw, you know, in our region, and they can be more attractive, you know, and improve retention by incorporating that into their outreach. And there are other things mentioned here in objectives. You know, when you think about municipalities and land use decisions, they have some direct controls over what types of uses get located near the trail, and how appropriate or how well those will work together. That's what's meant by context-sensitive land use. And see a couple folks having to leave for other meetings. This one is a little longer than the first one, so appreciate you sticking with us. We'll have a recording available later today for anyone who needs to drop out and catch up later. So on this fourth goal about our economies and economic development, are you seeing anything that we missed or anything that needs clarification here? Cool. And you can see these are pretty broad. You know, when we talk about promoting the trail as a tourism destination, that can be done by any number of players, you know, from the state to a town to a local business. So these are still pretty broad. There's a lot of objectives under the fifth goal that talks about making the trail a more accessible and safe experience for everyone. This features, we tried to focus on kind of the amenities and infrastructure construction concerns that would improve the trail in this goal. So I'll let you skim over those, you know, including things like considering lighting, things like, you know, bicycle storage and secure parking. It also touches on kind of right away. You know, the width of the trail is very big. There's sections of the trail where people are, you know, unclear where to go sometimes, or, you know, where does the public and land end and the private begin. Any clarifications skimming over these or questions so far?
Henry, you have it there, but if you could expand out in that the kinds of amenities that we're talking about, bike repair stations, seating, map kiosks, those sorts of things. Just be a little more specific about the kinds of amenities.
Thanks for the feedback, Roland. And some of those came up in some of the mapping and wayfinding related improvements. And I think, yeah, we can improve that.
Henry, I see that you have, you know, accessible highlighted in your goal, but in the objectives, I don't see something geared towards, you know, accessibility for folks with disabilities or ADA standards, and that might be something to consider.
Great comment, Bridget. And this, yeah, that could be mentioned more specifically. And in our previous trail planning project, we identified some ADA specific resources people improving the trail need to have in mind. But there's no mention of that here. So we can do that. Cool. This is great feedback so far. Again, we'll have another chance to look at these later on. So this is the last draft goal we have that deals more with collaboration, maybe more of the how organizations would work together or change how they're working together to improve the trail. Ideas that have come up include something like a Friends of organization. There's a lot of opportunities to strengthen, connections, for example, between snowmobile clubs who do volunteer, work parties and those other users that might not be aware of those opportunities. In the last year, some communities have focused more about projects through the Monadnock Region Rail Trail Collaborative. That's something to watch. And always to keep in mind that this is a state facility, and the relationship between Bureau of Trails and DOT is essential. And other ideas about people looking to improve the trail, like connecting with each other or collaborating.
Henry, I've got this Chuck again. I think part of the problem here in our region is we've got so many smaller towns that are fiscally, very fiscally constrained. And so sometimes when you go for large project money, it's very difficult to raise those funds for those local communities. What I think there should be is a strategy to address communities, specific communities, as the opportunity arises. For example, the state's largest solar array is going to be built in Fitzwilliam. Well, it's one of the largest companies in the United States that's building that solar array. That would be a good funding source for a local match. And of course, Hinsdale's meeting up with Brattleboro, through the bridge project. That could be an attractive option for companies in that whole area on both sides of the river. And so you have to go where the opportunities present themselves for funding sources. Otherwise, if you don't have the money locally, to match the bigger resources, you're having problems. And so that's all I'd recommend, is to sort of learn to digest as the opportunities arise, and not sort of think, well, we've got to develop this all at once, because it isn't going to happen that way. You got to be realistic. Keene's trail system took 20 years to develop. And that's with Keene's resources. So you kind of got to realize the realization of what limitations may exist.
Great comments, Chuck. Roland, go ahead. Oh, you went back on mute.
Okay. Mike sent me a note before he had to pop out. Want to make sure that we include, and I think this is the goal to include it in, is strategies around maintenance and collaboration around maintenance, because the trail cuts through many different places with many different stakeholders. So really working collaboratively on that to make sure that gets represented.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was thinking of Paul's comments earlier too. I think what we need is a number of new objectives, or maybe a new goal that talks about funding and maintenance, financial resources more specifically. Great. Any other comments on this last draft goal and objectives?
Henry, it's Paul again. As much as possible, I would recommend that however these objectives are phrased, they give a strong indication of how achieving the objectives can be measured. If you say you're going to enhance something, what does that mean? Because without those kinds of measures, when you go back to this original set of goals and objectives, you've got to have some way of saying, well, did we make this? Did we achieve what we thought we would achieve? So I would try as much as possible to avoid vague phraseologies.
Mhm.
I don't know what, for example, in this one, and I'm not picking on this one particularly, but it says objective 3, join the efforts of the Monadnock Regional Trail Collaborative. So what? We join up, what does it accomplish? I think it would be better to specify continuous ongoing interaction with the variety of groups that relate to the trail in order to blank,
Mhm.
to accomplish some things that we could then monitor over time. I think that helps. It helps any group understand exactly what is it that we're realistically going to be doing in order to determine for ourselves whether we're successful or not.
Well said, Paul. So we can, yeah, like on that item in particular, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Some of the other measures are more easy to have a performance target around. You know, if it's improving the trail surface, well, you could count miles of that or something. In our previous project, we tried to spend a lot of time developing some performance measure ideas for the objectives. We can share those or refer people to those. Unfortunately, we're probably in this project, we're not going to get that in that much detail in the plan. Cool. So to follow up that discussion, I'll be reaching out to everyone with like a time frame to hear more after we send out kind of an updated draft of those. It would be, you know, later in March, but keep an eye out for that. I also want to next talk about the other aspects to the plan. Yes, there'll be a vision, goals, and objectives. The second aspect, bigger aspect, will be an implementation plan, or basically a project list that will come out of things like the interviews, you know, comments about specific project ideas or areas that need improvement, like the drainage or wet areas Paul was mentioning with Fitzwilliam. This I'm not going to get into today. We're still kind of bringing these ideas together from things like the survey, but I wanted to make another promotion for the interactive map we have on our webpage. It's another resource we'll be using to document project ideas in a community, and it's still available for people to contribute to. So you'll be able to find it at the top of the project webpage. And what's basically involved is when you're aware of an area that could benefit from a project, maybe it's a restroom or an area that would be a great place to install an improved parking area or trailhead. You mark that physically on the map and provide a short description. We're going to use that to bring a list of potential projects back to the group. So please, if you haven't already looked at that, take a look at that in the next week or two. And any questions about this resource or how to use it, or how we'll create a list of project ideas? None so far. Well, stop me or come back to it if you think of anything. Like to just keep moving on the agenda. May be able to finish a little early today. For other matters, I don't have any prepared remarks, but I wanted to give 5 or maybe a few minutes for folks who had general questions about the project or have updates from your community and or organization relative to the trail. So this is an open discussion, and feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question or provide an update.
Henry?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Rick Ward. I'm a selectman down here in Winchendon.
Thanks for joining again.
Well, I find this very interesting and it will have an impact on our town also. I just want to let you know that at our February 8th boss meeting, we approved sending a letter to our Montezuma Regional Planning Commission to get assistance from them to perform a feasibility study to connect the North Central Pathway to New Hampshire and points west within Massachusetts. So there's some sort of activity going down here also.
Well, that's really exciting. Thanks for sharing that update. We'll be in touch with our regional counterpart and try to stay in touch with that.
Actually, could I make a comment, Henry?
Please.
Yeah, one thing which I don't think was in our previous discussion today, which I think is quite important, especially for those of us who are a little older, and that is we should have a discussion and including the complications involved in putting in appropriate privies along the trail and parking spots or maybe on the trail. You know, they have ones that are very low maintenance. And, you know, we're putting them in on the Wintastic and Monadnock Trail in a couple of places. So that's something I think which should be integrated in here to make the parking. I'm not sure where to put them, but to make the trail system friendlier.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It directly addresses something people are looking for as an improvement. Other state parks have those, for example. If you do, or anyone thinks of a place where those would be more needed or more appropriate, you know, please do put those points on the map. Otherwise, we could put it in as a kind of a catch-all project idea to consider. Any other things people like to ask or bring up?
Henry, Paul again, do you have any preliminary thoughts about how the advisory committee is composed? Or have you experience with other groups like this where you have a cross-town kind of organization and how those individuals get appointed and so on?
Yeah, we've used different approaches in different projects. This one happens to be definitely on the more informal side, and although we've kept, you know, maybe the formal channel open to select boards and town administrators, we didn't ask for like a written nomination from them about people who could represent their community. I think it lends itself pretty well to this, but we're open to feedback on how that's working, if there are opportunities to improve how we're, you know, pulling the group together for this.
Henry, this is Andy Bohannon. Thanks for all the information today related to the project. One of the things I know Mike Kowalczak and a few of us others have been talking related to just what Rick had mentioned, the possibility of connecting all the way down to Massachusetts, and what opportunity that would create for this region is pretty significant. In knowing that what we have for mountain bike trail facilities already established, and our bike park is unique in size comparatively to anywhere in New England. So we're definitely a destination, and I firmly believe that, I think we need to, obviously, you create the infrastructure and you create the parking nodes all around, on the various sections of the trail. And I think we've got momentum on multiple different things happening here. One of the things that I think we can't lose sight of, and I don't know if this is you folks or, this is where the chamber comes in or something, a greater initiative, but if we don't brand ourselves and make that connection on the marketing side of making sure that people know about our trail system and that connectivity down to Winchendon, down to into Massachusetts, we're like doing all this work for naught. Because I firmly believe that people will see Keene, Winchendon, that whole, I think a project goes out to North Adams, this area as a destination and ability to and what that could really do to our downtowns could be significant. And I know I've had conversations with UNH related to the Downtown to Trails initiative, which focuses on the economic impact of your trails in your downtown. We're working to get them to come over here. With COVID kind of stymied all of those conversations because it's very interactive, that process. And right now we're obviously not doing that. So, but the conversation continues, and I just want to say thanks. But I think the branding and the marketing is going to be it should be on the top of our list.
Thanks, Andy. Other comments or quick updates? Okay, well, we've done a lot of hard work today. I appreciate everyone's feedback. The next meeting will be for a to be determined date in April, and I will send out a meeting poll to find a good time. Prior to the meeting, as I mentioned, we'll be writing to you with a number of different updates. For example, if you're interested in reading more about survey results or trail counts, as well as another opportunity to provide input on the goals and objectives. At the third meeting, we'll provide this group a draft of a complete plan and project list. And we'll collect input on that. We'll talk about next steps. That agenda has yet to get pulled together. But that's a little bit about what to expect. As always, visit the project page. We'll get these slides up there in a recording later today. And you can write me, or if I'm not available, Todd, you can write or call us anytime with feedback. So I think that's it for today. Thank you everyone for taking a chunk out of the middle of a nice day, and look forward to being in touch with you in the near future. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.